All right, welcome. This is the Always Adaptive podcast. My name is Randall James, and I am your host. This is my first podcast ever. I'm excited to do this, but I'm also nervous at the same time. So I hope you'll bear with me as I struggle through. I got a bit of imposter syndrome going on now, just like I'm sure some of you have experienced when you dive into a new venture. There's always that those nerves that are telling you that you don't deserve to be here, but the way that I think is that I get asked a lot of questions, and I think I have the gift of gab. So when people are reading news stories when it comes to do with health and fitness, a lot of times it's from the perspective of a news anchor that doesn't really know much about health and fitness. And so I think me being an evidence-based coach, I read a lot of studies. I stay up to date on current research on various different topics when it comes to nutrition or just fitness in general. I think I have a unique voice, a unique perspective to offer on some of these stories. And so, the flow of this might change over time. I'm not exactly sure just yet, but what I'm thinking right now in this current moment is topical health and fitness news, offering my opinion on it based off of stuff that I've learned throughout the years and research that I've read. And also after that, going into like typical fitness topics that I know are trending, might not be news or noteworthy stuff, but just typical stuff that people talk about, offering my opinions on that. And then also people, as I said, ask me questions. So instead of just answering those people's questions individually, it's like obviously not telling you their names or anything, but offering those answers publicly, because I do feel like there's a trend where a lot of questions, there's a lot of repeat questions. And so offering those questions publicly, the answers to those questions publicly, I think a lot of people could get a lot of gain from. So that being said, I'm a personal trainer with 10 years of experience, and my website is alwaysadaptive.com, and you can follow me at alwaysadaptive on Instagram and X. And I am completely open to feedback, criticism. I want to try my best to improve at this each time. And if I say something, if I put my foot in my mouth and I misrepresent a study or something like that, please shoot me an article, shoot me a study. I love reading studies. I read them every morning, sit down with my coffee. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I'm always interested in learning, gaining new knowledge. And I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong completely. So please don't hesitate to send me stuff. But today we got a lot of cool things to talk about. Well, not really, some of them aren't really cool, but the first topic that I'm going to talk about is a fitness influencer that lost his life from steroids. He had quit, but was open about his use, which I think is good. But it's a sad story, and it's a sobering reminder of the risks of diving into that world. I'm also going to talk about a study called the Enrich trial, which I thought was very interesting. It was looking at the effects of aerobic exercises, effects on blood pressure, which is very important, right? And then also RFK Jr. has no shortage of headlines right now with his Make America Healthy movement. And there's a lot of things going on there. So we'll talk about that. I'm going to weigh in on some fitness topics, warming up, functional movement, and personal training being regulated. It's an interesting thing to think about, but I think there's some pros and cons that I think might be interesting. And then lastly, I'll round it out with a question that I was actually asked today. Okay. So moving right along, the first story, Jackson Tippett, who died at 30, and he was open about his steroid use, and he had quit. So I think this is a really sobering reminder that whenever we take any sort of substance like that, there is always a risk. And I feel like people have it in their head that if they can quit or, whatever, then they'll reverse the damage that was done, if they even recognize that there is damage being done. And I think we've lost enough fitness influencers at this point from all kinds of different substances that it's pretty safe to say that there is damage being done. But what I liken this to is smoking cigarettes or an alcoholic that's damaging their liver. If someone smokes, so like I used to smoke cigarettes, for example, I smoked for a really long time. I'm under no false pretense that because I quit smoking, my lungs are all of a sudden just going to magically heal all that damage that occurred on them. Maybe some of it, but I may have taken 3 to 5 years off of my life. And I feel fine now. Like, I'm a runner. I have great cardio. I'm pretty fast. And, it's like, okay, in my mind, it's like, well, if I can run, then I'll be fine. Right? No, not necessarily. That damage, it happens gradually and then all at once. So right now I feel fine. And then one day I won't. And it's the same thing for like liver toxicity and liver damage and alcohol, constantly drinking, your liver feels fine. And until one day it doesn't. And it's not like you really had any warning signs. Peter Attia talks about this with like heart attacks. I think it was him. He said, what is the number one sign of a heart attack? And the answer is sudden death. And it's because a lot of the times there are no warning signs. People just live their life. And then one day, boom, it comes out of nowhere. And so I think we need to start to think of steroids in the same way, that what are the risks? And I think Jackson Tippett's case is a sobering reminder. As I said, just because you quit doesn't mean you're going to be okay. But I do really respect that he was out in the open. And I think more people need to be out in the open with their use. And there have been quite a bit of fitness influencers that are out in the open about it. But there's still quite a bit of people that aren't. And there's people that lie. And it's really upsetting. I feel like I'll just tell you a story. I mean, I made a video about this the other day about how I went into a TikTok live with a guy who probably early 20s, 23, 24. And as soon as I went in there, I could tell that he was on something. And, I'll explain why in a moment. But I started digging in a little bit and I started asking him some questions. Hey, are you being open and honest about your steroid use or whatever? And he wouldn't answer me. And I asked him a bunch. And there was probably about 50, 60 people in there watching. And then eventually he just banned me. So what that told me is that no, he wasn't open and he wasn't planning on being. But what I noticed right off the bat when I say I knew he was on something, his nipples. So I'm going to go through a couple signs that you can look out for when you're online watching YouTube videos and you're not quite sure if someone's on something. Some things that you can look out for is something called gynecomastia, which is like a fatty breast tissue deposit right on the nipple or underneath of the nipple. Something just won't look right. It'll look kind of like a separation of tissue there. That's something to look out for. You can look out for varicose veins. So if you look at the veins on their arms or legs and there's like really like a S or Z shape and it's really tightly bound up, that's a varicose vein. And that's a pretty good indicator that they're on something. Acne in weird places like their chest. If you go back in their history, one thing I like to do when some of my followers or clients send me fitness accounts, the first thing I'll do is go way back in their past and look at how are they training, what did they look like, and you can learn a lot by digging into someone's past. And so if you dig into someone's past and they had a full head of hair and all of a sudden they're balding, that's a pretty good indicator that they're on something. Looking for injection sites. So if the guy, I don't know what his real name is, but his company is BODI Body, and I see his advertisements everywhere. And some of his advertisements, he has a shirt off and he has a little nodule right on his abs, and that's an injection site. So that's something you can look out for. It's about the size of a dime or so, just a little lump. But you see those things, and if you do see those things, call these people out, because I mean, you'll start to see that they get really nervous. They get really skittish, and that's a good indicator that is this person going to tell me the truth? Because if they're not, that's not the type of person, that's not the type of character you want to be associated with. You know what I mean? But all around sad, and I hope the trend starts to go in the opposite way where people stop talking about it because they're not taking it, but on to the next one. Speaking of like cardiovascular disease and all that stuff, the Enrich trial. So this was a really interesting study where they had two groups, a randomized controlled trial, two groups. One group was usual care. Now, usual care is like whatever the doctor recommends for them to do. And that could be upwards of 3 to 4 different blood pressure lowering medications and whatever. And then the other group was the same thing, usual care, plus a 12-week aerobic exercise program. And the results of this were pretty astounding to me. So 12 weeks is not a long time. It's 3 months. It's by in a blip of an eye. The aerobic exercise group had an 11.3 point drop in their systolic blood pressure. That's huge. Over 12 weeks, that's absolutely massive. Like someone with, 130 something could normalize their blood pressure in 3 months, essentially, just from doing aerobic exercise. More interestingly, the usual care group, just usual care, that could be on 3 to 4 different medications, they actually experienced a very slight increase. Now, you could say that it was not statistically significant, but either way, it should be going down. The trend should be down. And if it was not statistically significant but going down, that's fine. But the fact that it was going up, that's really concerning to me. And I'm passionate about this because I've been through the medical system for a really long time. So I have ulcerative colitis. I was diagnosed when I was a teenager. So I'm currently 37. And so that's 21, 22 years. I can't remember the exact year I was diagnosed, but ulcerative colitis is a big deal. And so I've been through the system, and not a single time has a doctor talked to me about exercise or nutrition or just lifestyle interventions in general. It was straight off to medication instantly. It almost was like a whirlwind, it just happened so fast. It's like, okay, you have this is what you need to take, and this is what you need to do. Okay. And you just don't ask questions because you feel like you should be, you feel like you can rely on these people. And I feel like studies like this are showing just how, one, powerful exercise is, but two, why we need to keep opening up these lines of communications with doctors, and not to skip stories just yet, but like having conversations with secretaries of HHS, for example. We'll get into RFK Jr. here in a second. But it's just, I think it's sad that there are not more doctors that are talking about this type of stuff. And it's not just blood pressure. I mean, there's studies now where they find that exercise and nutrition have a profound effect on anxiety and depression. So mental wellness is a really big space too. And therapy, okay, but like if you're eating food that doesn't make you feel good, you're going to have anxiety. You're going to feel depressed. I mean, one thing I pay attention to is can I feel my heart? This is something that you might take away from this. When I eat food, can I feel my heartbeat afterwards? If I can feel my heartbeat, that means it was either a high sodium or a high fat or just combination meal that's really stressing my heart out right now. My blood pressure is raised, so much so that I can feel each beat. Now, that's one, that's not good in general, but two, it's not good for your mental health. Like your brain and heart and body have a relationship. So it's not just you think something and your heart rate increases or your blood pressure increases. It actually works the opposite way as well. If you experience a sudden increase in blood pressure or a sudden increase in your beats per minute, that can have a profound effect on your psychology. That can make you really nervous. It can make you feel anxious. It can give you a panic attack, all kinds of different things. So it's not just about the blood pressure. I think there's a lot more that we need to be talking about. But segueing into the RFK Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again movement, I think this is where we need to be. This is exactly where the change happens, because I think he's shining a lot of light on a lot of really interesting things that are really important, like the different chemicals and stuff in our food. And RFK Jr. is no slouch. He's not exactly a specimen, but he's a strong dude. He obviously works out. You're not going to find many guys his age that can do fairly strict pull-ups, bodyweight pull-ups with no assistance. That's a pretty big accomplishment. Pull-ups are one of the hardest exercises. So to see him doing that actually gives me a lot of hope. And it's people like that are going to make the changes necessary to start to talk more about exercise and nutrition when it comes to doctors and certain interventions with diseases and mental health and all that stuff. So I'm very excited about it. And not to mention, he has a great resume. I mean, people love to take his stuff out of context and call him an anti-vaxxer, and they like to make it all political and stuff, especially people on the left. And not getting political here, one of the big things that the left like to talk about is the environment, right? And RFK Jr. has been a massive contributor to improving all kinds of environmental things, like a lot of litigation that he's been involved in. For example, the Monsanto Roundup litigation, where he represented Dwayne Johnson, who was a groundskeeper who developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma, after using Roundup, and the jury awarded him $290 million, concluding that Roundup contributed to his cancer. Now, that's interesting because I'm pretty sure people still use Roundup. And if they do, and then we have the story where he was awarded $290 million because of a cancer diagnosis, shouldn't we be talking about that more? Like, maybe I got it wrong. Are people still using Roundup? As I don't feel like that was banned. I mean, I hear people talk about it quite a bit, like people know, but was it banned? Or at least just open up lines of communication to make sure that people are using it properly. Maybe he didn't wash his hands or something afterwards because he didn't think too much about it. It can, you're spraying your lawn, maybe it gets on your ankles or something. There's all kinds of ways. But anyways, the New York City Watershed Agreement in 1997, he was instrumental in negotiating an agreement to protect New York City's drinking water supply. The deal involved implementing stricter environmental regulations and land acquisition strategies to safeguard the watershed, ensuring clean water for millions of residents. The Hudson River Keeper efforts of 1980s to 1990s. He was a leading attorney for Riverkeeper. Kennedy played a pivotal role in prosecuting polluters of the Hudson River. His efforts led to numerous successful lawsuits against companies discharging pollutants, resulting in substantial fines and stricter environmental regulations. So this guy, I feel like he has a good heart. He's got his head on right, and he has an idea of how he wants things to go. And I think it's going to be really beneficial for us. But unfortunately, people continue to attack him in a needless way, and they take his stuff out of context, which is really annoying. But I feel like that's why mainstream media is starting to die in the first place, is because people are catching on to just how often these news channels and magazines are taking people out of context and getting a little 10-second blurb and not including the rest of what they said. I'll give you, or even just, or focusing on a specific word that he said that wasn't quite right. I'll give you an example. So this is a story from CNN. Doctors say RFK Jr.'s anti-Ozempic stance perpetuates stigma and misrepresents evidence. So if you don't know what Ozempic is, it's a GLP-1 agonist. It's an injection. And essentially it was for type 2 diabetics. And through research, they started to find out that actually it was helping people lose weight. But unfortunately, what they also started to find out was that some of the weight that they were losing wasn't just fat, it was lean tissue, quite a bit of it. Now, I will say that there is a mixed bag when it comes to the evidence of that, but the fact that it exists in the first place means that we should not be latching on to this in such a extreme fashion. I mean, this drug has exploded and it's extremely expensive. It's not cheap at all. Not to mention you're taking away supply from type 2 diabetics that actually need it, which is very important. But going back to the story, what CNN says here is Kennedy claimed that Novo Nordisk, which makes Ozempic, doesn't market the medicine in its home country of Denmark, where, quote, they do not recommend it for diabetes or obesity. They recommend dietary and behavioral changes, end quote. In fact, CNN goes on, Denmark does use Ozempic, so much so that the Danish Medicines Agency said in May that it would restrict its use until after people had tried less expensive medications to treat diabetes. So I don't know if you caught that though, but he never said they didn't take it. He said they do not recommend it and they don't market it. And they really even just said it right there. They said in May that it would restrict its use until after people had tried less expensive medications to treat diabetes. They literally just said that they don't recommend it, but they take his words out of context. They try to say market, they try to say don't use it instead of market. And people don't ask questions. They don't dig into the story. They don't try to find RFK Jr.'s actual quote. And that is, I feel like the biggest problem today is like TikTok brain. Everyone has such a short attention span and they don't have the time or the, effort to dig deeper into some of these stories. But I am very hopeful for having, RFK Jr. on this team in this administration. I think, again, his background with environmentalism, his background with fitness, I think he's going to do great things. Another example of this was the Fruit Loops story. This one's been going super viral. I'm sure you've heard about this, but and I shared this on my story. But New York Times made a fact check on RFK Jr.'s claims about Fruit Loops. So New York Times is quoted on saying, Mr. Kennedy has singled out Fruit Loops as an example of a product with too many artificial ingredients, questioning why the Canadian version has fewer than the US version. The Times report read, but he was wrong. The ingredient list is roughly the same, although Canada's has natural colorings made from blueberries and carrots, while the US product contains red dye 40, yellow 5, and blue 1, as well as butylated hydroxytoluene, or BHT, a lab-made chemical that is used for freshness. So then he wasn't wrong. Now, I think where this stems from is that there was a quote of him saying that there were only 2 to 3 ingredients. And if he did say that, then that is wrong. But the main point here, and this is what really annoys me, is like you just admitted that there are these dyes and these chemicals for freshness in it, but you still focus on it's semantics. You're playing a semantic game where, 1 or 2 words get taken out of context and then they just destroy the whole statement. When the statement remains, what he's trying to say is factually correct and important, very important. But I think the greater claim here too. I posted that on my Instagram story, and someone messaged me, and just to give you an idea of the type of person this is, in their Instagram bio, it says supporter of rights for the systemically underserved people of the world. So you can make your own assumptions about that person. This, to me, that says that they're probably woke and whatever. I'm not woke, by the way. If that upsets you, that's fine. I have nothing against leftists, and I wouldn't say I'm a righty either. I'm probably smack dab in the middle. I have a lot of moderate opinions on things. But anyways, when people, so what he had messaged to me was, who's claiming that Fruit Loops are healthy anyways? And to me, that's like, you're basically saying that it doesn't matter. Like, why do the chemicals matter? Because Fruit Loops aren't healthy anyway. Well, if we think about the Canadian version that has fruits, blueberries and carrots as the colorings, well, the people here in the US, if you really claim to be a supporter of rights for systemically underserved people, the people in the US that are consuming Fruit Loops in the first place are the systemically underserved people that maybe they don't have enough time or money to make gourmet breakfasts for their kids, and those are the people that are going to eat Fruit Loops. So if we can make Fruit Loops better, if we can improve the ingredient content of Fruit Loops, then the people that aren't able to sit down and analyze their foods and make gourmet dishes, those people will benefit. And, what if we find out, there's so much stuff here that, what if we find out that these dyes are causing cancer later on? Because, that happens all the time. Everyone's mass consuming something, and then it comes out years later that it's causing cancer. Zantac, there's a big recall on Zantac, a really popular antacid. I've taken Zantac before. I know people that took Zantac every day. And so, we need to, when possible, try and improve the quality of these things. And maybe it's not going to benefit you. Maybe you don't eat Fruit Loops, but there are people that do. And there will continue to be millions of people that are broke, that all they can afford is a box of Fruit Loops for their kid. And that's all they got. And so we should look out for those people as much as possible. Anyways, weighing in on fitness topics that interest me. So here we're going to talk about, I'll start off with warm-ups. So warm-ups has been a pretty prevalent topic that I keep seeing it randomly popping up on YouTube videos or Instagram posts and whatnot. And it is an interesting topic because there's 2 camps, and I'm somewhere in the middle, and you'll learn that about me really fast. I like to sit smack dab in the middle of where the 2 camps are, because that's usually where the correct answer is. I don't like to take extreme positions on things. I try my best to not be dogmatic about certain things, and warm-ups are no different. So So I think there are people out there that will say that there are people warming up too long, where you'll see people going through these 20 to 30-minute mobility routines, as opposed to really focusing on getting your core body temperature up. And I think there's room for both. So I'll tell you personally what I like to do before I work out. The most important thing that I that I know to be true, and this is what the evidence says, is raising your core body temperature. So I'll do 5 minutes on an airdyne bike or stationary bike, just a Versa climber or elliptical, whatever, something to get me sweating and breathing hard a little bit and getting my core body temperature up. The reason why that's important is because a cold muscle is a stiff muscle and a warm muscle is a nice and elastic muscle. So I don't want to be stiff when I'm starting my workout. I want to be nice and loosey-goosey, nice and bouncy and stretchy. Now, the other part of that is I do specialize in functional movement, and I'll get into what that means later. That's the next topic that I'm going to talk about. I think functional movement gets taken too far sometimes, and people develop these really, really intricate routines that can take 20, 30 minutes. I do some version of a mobility functional movement routine, call it what you want, that takes 5 to 8 minutes, depending on what the day is, especially like my lower body, my leg day warm up might look a little different than my push or pull warm up. And that's because, I've struggled with lower back pain because of my colitis. I'll get into that in a moment. But all kinds of different things. I've had knee issues. And so I just find I have to get my lower body a bit more nimble before I get underneath a barbell. If I'm going to do barbell front squats or, deadlifting, Romanian deadlifts or something like that, I have to warm up a little bit more. Now, to me, there are things that I have to work on. Like I lack internal rotation in my hips. I have a lot of external rotation in my hips. I don't have so much internal rotation. So that's something that I find useful to work on before I go to do my lower body workout. Because when you're training your lower body, it's inevitable, especially getting to single leg work, there will be internal rotation. So if you're not adding that stuff in, then you're not really preparing yourself for what you have to do. Now, people do take it too far, and instead of getting on an elliptical or a bike or going for a light jog or something, raising their core body temperature, they'll just move. And they might do like prehab stuff. They'll grab some bands and they'll sit around stretching for a really long time. Where I think the evidence on stretching before a workout is not in favor of stretching unless it's a dynamic stretch. Static stretching, definitely not. You do not want to be doing something powerful right after doing some static stretching. But they're just doing it for far too long, where one, that time could be better spent lifting something heavy, or two, getting your butt home and cooking something. Like these people spend 2.5 hours at the gym, and that's just entirely way too much time. You can shave off 20 minutes if you just get your core body temperature up for 5 minutes, do a little bit of dynamic movement and stretching that's related to what it is that you're going to be doing, and then be on your way. And that's it. But weighing in on functional movement. So as I said, this is something that I do specialize in, and I am a fan of functional movement, but I think functional movement gets taken too far a lot of times. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So I'll start off with what I mean by functional movement. So functional movement to me is like using a squat, because you do squat every day. Every time you sit up and down out of a chair, you're squatting. Every time you get off the toilet, you stand up from the toilet, you're standing up from a squat. And some toilet seats are incredibly low, depending on where you live. Like this is a bathroom right behind me. That toilet is a lot lower than the toilet that's in my master bedroom. So there are people I know that would have a hard time squatting down to sit on the toilet that's behind me. And so that's an important movement. Having some sort of vertical overhead pressing strength. Like if you're trying to get a heavy box off of a top shelf, if you don't have some sort of overhead strength, you're not going to be able to stop that heavy box from smacking you in your face. Having some sort of pulling strength, so rows and pull-ups. If you're on a hike and you slip down a hill, it's gravel and you roll and you're falling and it's a very steep hill and you don't have any sort of pulling strength, and you can't pull yourself back up that hill. So to me, all the basics are functional. Pull-ups, push-ups. If you don't have any sort of horizontal pressing strength, some person, you're out on a date with your miss or your man, and someone comes up to you and starts messing with you, and you don't have any sort of push-up skills or pressing skills or strength, and you can't push them away. Being able to defend yourself is important. Carrying groceries. So like carries, farmers carries. There are activities that require a certain level of VO2 max, and people underestimate. There's a study, I'll talk about this more in depth in another episode, but it's a very interesting study where it listed out various activities and what level of VO2 max is required to carry out those. And one of them was carrying groceries or walking upstairs. And I think we underestimate as we get older how much more difficult those tasks start to become. So that is what functional movement is to me. It doesn't really go further than that. Where it does go further than that for me specifically is when I'm working with an elderly client that has no history of fitness, has no bodily awareness. And this is very common. And I think this goes to a lot of people that talk about this stuff. They don't have a coaching background. They've never worked with people before. And you can say all this stuff, that's fine. But until you've actually put hands on a client, you don't know to what extent you can just say the regular fitness stuff that everyone talks about. So like if I have a client that can't turn their head, I have to teach them how to turn their head. That's pretty important. If they're driving and they need to check their blind spot, they can't do it because they can't, or they get a crick in their neck when they try to. They strain a muscle. That's functional movement to me. Just teaching them how to turn their head, teaching them how to extend their neck and flex their neck. Shoulder movement. If someone has never worked out before and it's late in their life and they can't move their arm without their shoulder elevating up into their ear, their neck likes their upper trapezius muscles like to take over the movement. That's an important thing because I can't move on to a push-up with that person until I start to see improvement with their ability to dissociate their shoulder from their neck. Can they move their shoulder without their neck moving? And even with running, where if someone's running and as they're separating their hips, as one leg goes into flexion, you see their spine twist because they've lost the ability to dissociate their hips from their spine. They can't move their hips independent from their spine, and that's a problem. And so guess where else that's going to show up, by the way? It's going to show up in their lunge. It might show up in their single leg deadlift, which is really important too. So to me, that is where I do take functional movement a little bit more to the extreme, is when someone almost like not really prehab, but just teaching people what they can do with their body if they don't have that. But most times, if someone has a fitness background, you don't need to go that far. If they're brand new, yes. If they're kind of older, yes. But if they're experienced lifter, they've been lifting for 3, 4, 5 years, or they were in the military, or they were an athlete or something, chances are they have the bodily awareness that they don't need to go that granular with things. But anyways, that's my take on it, on functional movement. I think it is very beneficial, not to mention for rehab. So there's some data out there where they compare functional movement to traditional physical therapy even. And the results of that come back where there is no difference, or there is a favorable effect for functional movement, which that's huge to me, and what is physical therapy in the first place? You could say physical therapy is functional movement. Like, what are you doing when you go in for a physical therapy appointment? They're teaching you how to move the joint that's injured, because most of the times the injury that you sustained was due to some sort of movement inefficiency where you couldn't dissociate your shoulder from your neck, or you couldn't separate your hips from your spine or something like that. So it's like your spine, you got lower back pain because your hips are cranking on your lower back all day because you don't know how to use your glutes. So what does a physical therapist do? They teach you how to use your glutes. They teach you how to do these tasks. So that to me is functional movement, So I think functional movement is sort of like a blob of a term. But yeah, I think where it goes too far is there's a guy, Functional Movements with an S, and you'll see him do all kinds of crazy stuff where he's flying around, he's using a cable cross machine, and he's like rotating and punching, and it looks like he's doing like kung fu moves with load. And I mean, okay, but I think that time is better spent just lifting heavier, or finding ways of producing as much power as possible with something like a kettlebell swing or a power clean with barbell, like Olympic lifting. Like, if you're trying to train power, instead of trying to make the movement look like a punch, teach them how to produce as much power as possible through their legs, because the better they transfer force through their legs and their torso, the stronger that punch is going to be. Where they get their ability to throw that punch is from technique drilling. right? Like they're actually going to learn to punch better while they're sparring, when they're with their coach and their coach is, eyeballing their certain mechanics when it comes to a punch, or, even baseball or basketball or anything. It's during practice or when they're getting coached by the person in that field that's going to improve their actual swing as well. So I think that's kind of unnecessary for people in my field to be chasing after. I just like to make people more powerful. That's what I go for. If I can make you faster, more powerful, great. I'm not going to try and mess too much with your swing or your throw or your punch. But lastly, the last fitness topic that I want to touch on is personal training being regulated. And this kind of ties into functional movement being compared to rehab, physical therapy, because I do think there's an opportunity here for a lot of growth. One of the biggest things for personal trainers is that people can't afford us, right? And so wouldn't it be amazing if personal training was covered by insurance? Now, I'm of two minds on this because it's touchy. One thing that I do know is that in physical therapy, someone comes to you with back pain, you could know the physical therapist could know a specific treatment that could help that person. But if it's not covered by insurance, the physical therapist won't use it on them. And this is what I kind of fear for when it comes to personal training. If we get to the point where personal training is covered by insurance, but then who's the governing body over that insurance, and like what's approved versus not approved? Because there's all kinds of different protocols and exercise modalities out there that people use for all kinds of things. Different camps for strength training, different camps for bodybuilding, different camps for running. It's the wild west out there. And so who's to say which one is perfectly best? So that's where I'm kind of hesitant on it, but I do think it would be good, because I do think there are a lot of people that don't have a really good fitness background. They just, I have a six pack and I was a college athlete. I played football. Let me try and teach people how to be like me. But they have no, anatomy background. They don't know physiology. They don't really know anything except for the fact that this is how they did it. They did it by doing this one thing. And if you don't have, one thing about having a certification is that there are continuing education requirements every year to 2 years. And so you have to continually learn new stuff. And I think that's a very important thing in any field. There's all kinds of fields, like real estate agents have to get continuing education. You have to continually learn things about your field that are ensuring that you're not going to get left behind when it comes to evidence-based stuff, evidence-based practices. And so if someone isn't certified by anything, those requirements aren't there. And to me, it's disruptive for me to have to do like other different certification programs and stuff, but I love it because I'm learning more, and I'm continually pushing myself to broaden my horizons, learning about behavior change, stuff that might not even have to do with actually lifting weights or nutrition. Like psychology is very important, learning how to talk to clients, learning how to, motivational interviewing, stuff of that nature, learning how to build rapport. These are things that people don't think enough about, that you're not going to get the results you want with the client if you're not effective at communicating with them, But anyway, so those are the topics. Moving on to the last thing, we have just a question that I was asked today. And this is something each week or each episode, I'll talk about a different question that I was asked. But the question I was asked today was, quick question. I'm at this conference in Atlanta and was standing pretty much all day yesterday because this conference staff forgot to bring seats to our booth. This morning, I woke up with a stiff, sore lower back, and I'm curious if that's a sign of a weak core. That's a good question. And I feel like there's a lot of people out there that have had similar situations where maybe they were forced to walk a lot, or they were standing around at an event and their back was just crushed at the end of it. Where my mind goes with this, and this is the answer that I gave him, is I heard a while ago, I can't remember where I heard this from, but it stuck with me, that when you have really good posture, your muscles are free to relax. And the reason for that is your skeleton, your bones, are a solid structure. So if I'm standing up nice and tall here, my muscles are hanging out on my bones. If I have forward head posture, which is very common with people in the IT space or whatever, if I have forward head posture, my center of mass is slightly pitched forward. And because of that, muscles on the back of my neck, my spinal erectors are all working at a very low level contraction to sort of keep me pulled back. So my center of mass is in between my feet. That's how the body works. You're always trying to overcome gravity. So if I'm slowly pitched forward, those muscles are working at a very low level. Now combine that with standing for 8 hours or 7 hours or whatever, and you run into an issue. Even though it's not like a really strong contraction where you could really like tear something, those muscles are still straining because it's such a long time that they're in a contracted state. And so you might get warning signs like a little bit of a pain response. It doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong. It just means that your nervous system is not liking something, and it's sending you a signal that you need to change some sort of behavior. Now, he asked about his core, and I think it could be the core. It could also be the glutes, and my mind goes to both. It's probably a little bit of both. Now, in this specific case, I do know this individual had a little bit of an anterior pelvic tilt in his past working with the physical therapist. So that being said, he might have a little bit of hyperextension in his lumbar that's causing that. But I think the core and the glutes work together to correct that first and foremost. But what I told him was what I would pay attention to is when you're walking and standing, do you feel your glutes working? So like me, even just standing here right now, my glutes are turned on, and it's not like a high level of intensity. It's just, I kind of feel them clicking on. They're doing their job. And when I'm walking, each step I take, when I take a step with my right, I feel my glute click on the right. When I take a step with my left, I feel my glute click on the left. That's important because the job of the glutes is to extend your hips to keep you upright. And when they're not doing their job, they're one of the strongest, powerful largest muscles in the body. When they're not doing their job, you have to ask the question, well, what is keeping you upright? And goes back to my earlier point, how other muscles are working. They're doing a job that they're not supposed to be to keep you upright. And then you can run into strain. So to me, if he strengthened his glutes and he engaged his core, because if he has anterior pelvic tilt, that is a core thing. He does have to be able to engage his abs to keep his hips extended there too. So that's where my mind goes. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's exactly what it is without like knowing more about him and how he moves, but things to think about, do you feel the right muscles doing the job of the thing that you're trying to do in the moment? So that being said, wow, 42 minutes. So one take, did the whole thing. That's crazy. If you're still around listening, I really appreciate you listening to this whole thing. It means a lot to me. As I said, it's my first podcast ever, and there are more to come for sure. I enjoyed this process. It's difficult. I feel like I'm already losing my voice a little bit, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I guess that means I have to take care of my voice, more stuff to do. But all good. If you want to follow me, you can follow me again on Instagram at Always Adaptive and X at Always Adaptive. My website is alwaysadaptive.com, and I do offer personal training packages online and in person. And the online process is actually a lot smoother than you might even think. But if you're living in the Raleigh, Wake Forest, Rollsville area, that's where I service in person. I drive to people's houses and teach them how to train at home. But yeah, I think this was cool. I enjoyed it. It's a little nerve-wracking. The nerves kind of disappeared after a while, but you just kind of get into the flow. I think I got into a little bit of a flow state there. But I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And like I said, if I ever put my foot in my mouth and I say something that's not true, or I misrepresent some data, please point it out, send me articles, send me studies. I'm always willing to improve. And yeah, I hope you'll do that, and I hope you'll follow me, and I'm looking forward to doing the next one. So I'll see you then.